we start. And we also want to note that this webinar will be recorded, and the recordings will be available in our social media networks, on our YouTube channel as well. Scrum issues. Crossing fingers. We are at 25 to 1 on the dot. So allow me to officially start the session. I just want to take this time and welcome you all to the Real Reform for Early Childhood Development Annual General Meeting and a Year in ECD webinar. Thank you all, colleagues, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us, especially this time of the year. It's critical, like the last month of the year, everyone is busy, but you've set out this time to join us. We really appreciate that. And a special welcome to our esteemed panelists, to our Real Reform for ECD Steering Committee members, our subcommittee members, our ECD practitioners, and to all our different stakeholders and our partners. I welcome you all, Real Reformers. This is a new term, Real Reformers. It actually, when was it? In September, when we had our very first in-person meeting as a steering committee, we coined this term, and it fits very well. The Real Reformers. I welcome you all. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rina Mato. I am a System Design and Development Testing Coordinator at Ilifa Labantwana. But today, I will be facilitating this webinar as a steering committee member for the Real Reform for ECD campaign. I also think that it is actually very important that before we move on, we introduce who the Real Reform is, so that we all get a sense of who is hosting you today. The Real Reform for ECD is a movement that is advocating for holistic, well-funded, inclusive, quality ECD services for all children in South Africa. And as this movement, our vision is to see all young children in South Africa thrive and access holistic, inclusive, and quality ECD services. So we are a broad-based coalition made up of a dedicated elected representative who form the steering committee to lead the work of the Real Reform, and we're supported by over 200 organizations. So today we are hosting you in this webinar, and we've termed it a Year in ECD webinar to analyze the Real Reform for ECD's performance in this year, 2022, and also look at our future strategy for the campaign and opportunities going forward. So through this webinar, we will also reflect and engage more as well, and learn from all that has happened in this year. There's been a lot of developments happening in the sector, as we all know. We've seen and witnessed the momentum in the sector, from the migration of the ECD function, moving from the Department of Social Development over to the Department of Basic Education, the expansion of the ECD provision in the Second Children's Amendment Bill, and all that has been happening in the ECD space. So we will engage more with this. This webinar is more like a check-in on what has been happening in the space and what we're learning from all these numerous activities that has been happening. We've noted that the session is recorded. I know the people that have sent through their apologies that they couldn't join us today because of our load shedding, though, the realities of the Republic of South Africa. So we're going to kick off without the waste of time because we don't want to lose the people that we have already. Have our panelists, and we will be in conversation with them as we've seen the agenda, and they will be touching on a very, very interesting agenda items. So I would like to encourage us all throughout the session to pop in our questions and our comments. So we'll pop in our comments in the charts, and we'll have our questions in the Q&A box. But if you mix them around, we have a team that will manage to sort that out. It doesn't matter where you put your questions. So allow me to introduce to you our panel for the day today. We are honored to have Kayin Scholz. Kayin is an ECD resource hub manager at the DGMT Trust. And he's also currently sitting as the chairperson of the Real Reform for ECD Steering Committee campaign, our steering committee chairperson. So Kayin is trained as a social worker, that's interesting, and has honors in policy and management. He has 10 years of experience working with social purpose education organizations in South Africa. And Kayin's ECD experience includes supporting the resource and training for ECD programs, supporting funding interventions for ECD programs as well, supporting quality assurance, improvement, and supporting interventions for ECD. So he has like a decade of experience in working with ECD-related work. We also have Tshepo. Tshepo is the Right to ECD coordinator at the Equality Collective, and he's also a member of the Real Reform for ECD Campaign Steering Committee. Tshepo is a Rhodes University alumnus. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in psychology, with a focus on childhood disabilities, developmental psychology, and community psychology. He also holds an LLB degree focusing on human rights and specifically the right to education. As the member of our Real Reform for ECD Steering Committee, Tshepo supports the coordination of the campaign and also coordinating the Make Local Government Work for ECD for the movement. Lastly, but not least, we have Dr. Janeli Kotze. She's an acting director for ECD at the Department of Basic Education. So through my permission, as the facilitator and the chairperson for this webinar, I would like to give Janeli's full biography just before she takes off the platform, as she is our honorable guest speaker for today. It is such an honor to have all of you, the three of you, on our panel today. We're really looking forward to our engagements with you. To take off as our agenda, I would like to invite Kayin Scholz, to give us the chair's report as the chairperson of the Rural Reform for ECD Steering Committee, and also present the ECD data in 2022. Over to you, Kayin.
Thank you, Rina. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, it's wonderful seeing so many familiar faces. And it's always wonderful to be able to come together in service of the early childhood development sector in this way. So yeah, it's exciting to be able to share with you the journey that Real Reform for ECD have gone on, and really to reflect on this year and the work that has been happening. So I'm going to be talking first quickly about the history of Real Reform for ECD, the journey that we've been going on, so you can sort of get a deeper sense of where we've come from. And then towards the end of my session, I'm going to look at reviewing some of the developments in the ECD sector this year, so that we can all have a shared understanding of what some of the key challenges have been throughout the course of 2022. To start with, though, I think let's reflect on where Real Reform for ECD came from. So we're quite a new coalition. We really are a coalition of organizations. We were initiated in 2020, July, in part really in response to the Children's Amendment Bill. There were some challenges with the amendment to the Children's Act, and a number of organizations felt that it would be worthwhile mobilizing in response to that. And also the campaign was built off the back of the success of the Save Our ECD Workforce campaign, and some of the mobilizing that had taken place through that work. So really there was a moment of dynamism in 2022 that we were building from. Then in August 2020, the Children's Act, the amendments to the Children's Act were tabled. We had a first general meeting of supporters in November 2020, where we developed terms of reference, which still guide our work today as a coalition. And a steering committee was elected in November 2020. In November 2020, the parliamentary submissions for the Children's Amendment Bill were also due, and the Real Reform for ECD campaign mobilized. We mobilized around 1,600 submissions, and we can't take credit for all of those, but we know that a significant number of those submissions on the bill were due to some of the mobilization work that we'd conducted, and helping to clarify the challenges with the bill, helping to make it possible for practitioners to make submissions themselves. Workshops across the country. So it was really some exciting work in mobilizing local democratic forces to really participate in the legislative process, as they should have the right to do. Then in May 2021, the Portfolio Committee on Social Development rejected the ECD, the clauses related to the to ECD and the Children's Amendment Bill, which then led to the splitting of that bill into two bills, the one which has progressed, and then the clauses relating to early childhood development are still being amended so that they can be tabled next year. There were public hearings on the Children's Amendment Bill in May 2021. Real Reform for ECD presented oral submissions to the Portfolio Committee, together with a powerful coordination from supporting organizations. So there were really a number of incredible presentations that were made, and that I think helped really lead to convincing people that there really did need to be amendments to the Children's Act. There were provincial hearings in Limpopo and Mpumalanga that Real Reform helped to mobilize around, so that it wasn't just at a national level, but also at the provincial level that Real Reform was doing mobilization. And that was, the initial impetus behind the campaign, is really around the Children's Amendment Bill. But after that, after we'd managed to see some traction on that, after we'd sort of come to an end of that process, in June 2021, we decided to do a review of the campaign strategy to determine whether or not it'd be worthwhile continuing the campaign. And we gathered inputs from all of our supporters, and we developed a longer strategy. And we decided that the campaign was valuable, and that the work that we were doing could continue to exist, and there would be additional areas of work that we would focus on. Eventually, in July 2021, members of the Real Reform for ECD Steering Committee were invited to join the technical team, which was reviewing the legislation, the Children's Amendment Bill. And so that we are confident that some of the suggestions that have been generated through the sector will be very, very strongly considered and, could well be included in the amendments to the Children's Act going forward. So that really is a sign of partly the Real Reform for ECD campaign, but also just partly the broad buy-in that we've seen from the sector ready to participate in the legal process. Another thing that we organized in 2020 were in 2021 were virtual pickets. So we saw ECD practitioners from across the country taking a moment to stand for, to highlight the challenges they were experiencing, to draw attention to the particular issues that we were trying to see some movement on. The 5 reforms that we've been calling for with regard to the Children's Amendment Bill are that we believe we need a one-step registration process for ECD providers. We believe that ECD providers need access to per child per day subsidy for all children who need it. We believe that simpler, adequate health and safety program standards need to be developed, that support to meet the registration requirements need to be provided, and that infrastructure support and development for ECD providers should be provided. And yeah, some of the core successes that we've seen are that we generated 1,600 submissions, certainly our work supported that. We managed to see 212 organizations sign on in support of the Real Reform for ECD campaign goals. As I mentioned, had been supporting the technical committee, and we did a series on ECD practitioners' voices, highlighting the specific challenges that practitioners have been experiencing and helping to, ensure that information is seeping into the broader public consciousness. Our work at the moment is focused on 4 core areas, which is the Children's Amendment Bill, local government campaigns, which Tshepo will be talking about in more detail in a bit, rights to nutrition research, as well as the recognition of the rights to early childhood development. So these are our core focus areas in the guiding work that we're driving towards. But our work cannot be just us. We are a loose coalition of organizations, and our work really is driven by partnerships. The resourcing specifically for the Real Reform for ECD campaign is relatively small. And so the majority of our work really comes through our partner organizations. And so it's important to recognize that we have 622 members across 4 provinces. There are forums in Joburg, Buria Valley, Nkomazi, Ngusha, Makana, and the city of Ekurhuleni, who really are driving a lot of the engagements at a local level. And I think that work is absolutely critical to our success. We also have partners in a legal subcommittee. We have partners who support the work of the Right to Nutrition task team. And we also have, obviously, we were speaking earlier about the importance of the Secretariat and the work that Tshepo has been doing in supporting, organizing, and keeping the campaign moving. And then Zoe as well, who's been helping with communications and making sure that that's of a high standard. I also wanted to quickly just make sure that, because this is an annual general meeting, that updates to the governance of the campaign are clear. So in the last annual general meeting last year, November, we elected 11 steering committee members. Since then, there have been a few small changes to the steering committee. We've seen new Smart Start representatives from, we've seen 2 new Smart Start representatives join, 2 new Bridge representatives join, a new representative on behalf of Ilifa Labantwana, and then I've been seconded onto the steering committee. And these are all in line with the process outlined in the terms of reference, and due to staff changes in the organizations. So we will continue to serve our terms until November next year, where we will have a new general meeting to elect a new steering committee for the campaign. So the current steering committee members are the people indicated in the table that you're seeing now. So there are 11 organizations represented. Okay, now I want to move on to providing a quick update of some of the information which has become available to us relating to the ECD sector this year. It's always a bit fun getting to do this when some of the people who actually did this research are on the call. So yeah, thanks to colleagues in the Department of Basic Education and others who actually conducted much of this research that we now get to learn from. So one of the critical pieces of research that took place this year was the ECD census. This is the first census, full census of ECD programs in South Africa, and absolutely critical for us to understand the scale of work that is taking place across the country. This was conducted by the Department of Basic Education in collaboration with the Lego Foundation, with Ikapa Data doing a lot of the field work, and data was collected between August 2021 and February 2022. That tells us that there are 42,420 early learning programs across the country. There may be more, but this is how many that we managed to find in the census. Of those, 33% are receiving the per child per day subsidy, 41% are registered or conditionally registered. There are about 1.6 million children enrolled in programs, although that is down from 1.9 million children pre-COVID. There are around 198,000 staff employed at early learning programs. And I think this is critical. You know, there are only 400,000 teachers in the sector. So it really shows you how large the ECD sector is. It really is a significant sector that really does deserve recognition. The average fee per child, based on the census, is around 509 Rand, although that does change with some provinces having much higher average fees. For example, the Western Cape and Gauteng have average fees of over 800 Rand, whereas the Eastern Cape has an average fee of, I think, 280 Rand. And we also see that this varies significantly based on whether an ECD program is subsidized or unsubsidized. We also see that ECD programs or early learning programs typically provide at least one meal as part of their daily program, with 77% of early learning programs actually doing the provision of those meals. Some of those meals are obviously provided by caregivers. So that was critical information that the census highlighted. Then the Thrive by 5 baseline report was initiated by First National Bank Innovation Edge in collaboration with Department of Basic Education, supported by USAID and ECD Measure. This was focused on understanding the outcomes of children between 4 and 5 years old in early learning programs. And this is really focused on the 45 to 55% of children who are enrolled, children 4 to 5 who are enrolled in some form of early learning program. So these outcomes are probably for children who are receiving some kind of focused support in early learning, and there may be worse outcomes for children who actually aren't enrolled in early learning programs. So we must always bear that in mind. The assessment was of 5,000 children drawn from about 1,200 early learning programs across all 9 provinces. And the assessment focused on 3 developmental domains associated with longer term outcomes. So early learning was one of the focuses, as was physical growth. And then the social emotional functioning was also another focus area. That was then built into a composite indicator, which highlighted whether or not children are thriving. Otherwise, children were indicated as having barriers to thriving if they were only on track for physical growth or early learning, or if they were not on track for either physical growth or early learning, they were then indicated as having significant barriers to thriving. So that's how the results of the Thrive by 5 survey should be interpreted. And outcomes were really striking and quite worrying. What we saw from those outcomes were that 43% of children thrive by 5, which means that 53% face barriers to thriving and 4% face significant barriers to thriving. So the majority of children in South Africa are not thriving by 5 and really do need support. And this is just based on children in early learning programs. So the additional children who are not in early learning programs may be facing even more significant barriers. We also saw that girls perform better than boys in terms of thriving. And children in quintile 5 schools, so that's the wealthiest 20% of children, or children close to quintile 5 schools, perform better than children close to quintile 1 schools. So we saw that the wealth of the area that you're going to an ECD in really does determine how your outcomes are. And one of the important findings from the survey was that we really need collective action in order to decrease the performance gap between young children and the in the richest and poorest households at the point of entry into school, and that we need to increase the percentage of young children in South Africa who thrive by 5, setting more children up for success. And this is really a critical call, I think, that the Real Reform for ECD campaign should be bearing in mind as we continue to do our work. Lastly, we saw that there were particular areas where children were less likely to thrive or less likely to do well on the early learning outcomes measure. So fine and visual motor integration and emergent numeracy and mathematics were particularly low, although the scores across the board were quite low. Okay, so then lastly, I wanted to touch on the ECD baseline. The ECD baseline assessment was conducted in 545 early learning programs that participated in the Thrive by 5 index across all 9 provinces. The baseline assessment aims to improve insights into resourcing, operations management, financing, human resourcing, infrastructure, and infrastructure of early learning programs. And the data was collected through a principal questionnaire, a practitioner questionnaire, an early learning program observation instrument, and a lesson observation with 4-year-olds. The sample was not completely representative of the ECD sector, so we should be cautious when we are interpreting these results. 57% of the early learning programs in the sample were fully registered, while only 28% in the ECD census are fully registered. 61% of organizations in the sample were receiving a subsidy, while only 33% of organizations in the broader census are receiving a subsidy. Therefore, data from the baseline likely presents a slightly overly positive picture of the state of the ECD sector. Nevertheless, it gives us very deep data on the state of the ECD sector, and we should engage with it nonetheless. So based on this information, we see that 89% of ECD practitioners indicate that they've received less than minimum wage, i.e. less than 3,500 Rand per month for a 40-hour work week. 30% of early learning programs have had to reduce staff salaries compared to previous years. So we're not even seeing that increasing necessarily. We're seeing a real pressure on salaries in ECD programs. We see about 20% of ECD practitioners do not make use of an activity or lesson plan. And we see that income at early learning programs is spent on a mix of food, staff salaries, materials, maintenance, and administration, but that this doesn't completely match the subsidy ratio that ECD programs receive for the per child per day subsidy. So there are some distinctions in terms of how the subsidy is expected to be spent and how early learning programs are currently spending their income. Over a third of early learning programs provide their classes in English, and a quarter provide their classes in isiZulu. So we're also starting to get a sense of what languages early learning programs are taking place in. And we also see that over 80% of early learning programs receive some support from the DSD. This is in terms of site visits. 69% receive some support from municipalities, and around 30% receive some support from NGOs. So we are seeing that organizations are receiving some site visits, but there are still gaps in terms of how many organizations are receiving support. And lastly, we see that early learning program income is highly related to child outcomes. And this is similar to what I was saying earlier around the area that you live in to some extent determines the outcomes that you have as a young child. But what we see here is that caregiver income is highly related to child outcomes. Meaning that either there are household factors in wealthy households that are improving child outcomes, or that early learning programs that are charging fees have more resources that they can use to improve child outcomes in the early learning programs. But either way, this is an issue around equity in early learning programs, and certainly something that we should think about when trying to expand access to the early learning subsidy. So there were 5 recommendations made by the ECD baseline. These are to provide support for early learning programs to meet minimum norms and standards, to provide instructional support to early learning programs to improve learning outcomes, to strengthen human resource development, to improve the level of funding for early learning programs, as well as the efficiency of the use of this funding by early learning programs, and to improve the accessibility of early learning programs for children with disabilities. And I think we can really start to see that the work of the Real Reform for ECD campaign is touching on a number of these recommendations from both the Thrive by 5 and the ECD baseline. And so our work is responsive to the needs that are being highlighted in the sector to date. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to you, Rina. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Kayin. That was a very interesting presentation that you've just given us. Thank you for the reflections on how the campaign, that's where you started, on how the campaign was formed and what was the motive behind that. You also touched on our key focus in the as the campaign. So we thank you for your time as chair of the steering committee, and you're still continuing. You have played a critical role in ensuring that the steering committee functions properly. There's full participation of our steering committee members, and all the relevant matters are discussed and decisions are made and carried out. Thank you very much for that time. It is quite interesting that you've pretty now, well, I believe in, and I assure our participant that the presentation will be shared after this, as well as the recording. You've touched on quite a number of areas in your reflections over the ECD data in 2022. And I feel that this whole information is actually liberating to have this data. So it will arm the policymakers, it will arm us for better planning. Now I will be handing over to Tshepo. In September last year, we had our very first in-person real reform for ECD steering committee member meeting. We used that time to deepen our strategic objectives and plans. So Tshepo will be presenting on the real reform for ECD strategy for the next 5 years, and he will also present on our campaigns for 2022. Over to you, Tshepo.
Of course, this is Rina. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Tshepo Mantje from the Equality Collective. I just want to take a moment to extend my gratitude for being given this opportunity to be reflecting on the work that has been done by Real Reform for ECD, and more specifically, what informs the work that is being done by Real Reform for ECD. So if you, and the campaigns that we have worked on. So if you'll allow me, I'm just going to share my screen, and we'll take the presentation from there. Sister Rina, can you see my screen?
Not yet, Tshepo.
Still sharing. Now we can, yes.
It's visible, Tshepo.
Okay, it's good. We're good to go. So yes, I will be talking about our strategy and the campaigns that we have been working on as Real Reform for ECD. So I will be starting with the background to the strategy. This will be talking to us about what informs the way that we work. And then I'll talk about the way that we do work. So how have we been implementing this strategy? And then where have we been implementing this strategy? And that will be in the campaigns that we are working on. So starting off with the background, what we know is that South Africa has a long history of the law being used to open spaces for social and political change. The use of the law and legal processes is a critical tool to be used to achieve long-term strategy of real reform. It is therefore important to consider effective legal mobilization and public interest, or the ways in which public interest law organizations work with communities and social justice lawyers position themselves in the struggle for social change. So our strategy is essentially based on legal mobilization. Legal mobilization is increasingly being understood to be more than just an analysis of the role of lawyers, litigation, and judicial impact, but also it is the law's capacity to allow social movements and their members, such as Real Reform for ECD, to identify and name social injustices, frame demands, and set and advance movement agendas. So essentially, it's going beyond the courtroom and using the law just in the courtroom, but making the law accessible to the people so that people are able then to use the law as an empowering agent. The broader role of legal mobilization is to consciously support grassroots progressive movements through legal advocacy, support, and litigation where necessary, and to make available to communities, in our case, to the real reformers, the tactical power of the law in the greater struggle against inequality, oppression, and discrimination. This is achieved through, amongst other things, strategic litigation, conducting legal research, making submissions on proposed law and policies, engaging key stakeholders, and developing recommendations for reform, all the while being committed to using the law to build power for the people. So essentially, what Real Reform for ECD is trying to do, and what informs what we're trying to do, is we want to see all children in South Africa thriving, and we believe that an enabling legal framework is an essential component to how we can achieve this. Pictured here are just a few of our real reformers. These are ECD practitioners who Real Reform for ECD has been working with in the past couple of years. So we're going now into the implementation of this strategy. Real Reform for ECD's vision, as I said, is to see all children in South Africa accessing holistic, well-funded, inclusive, and quality early childhood development services. And we achieve this by working on the foundation on three pillars: legal mobilization, research and solutions, and movement building. Essentially, when we talk about legal mobilization, as I explained, it's about mobilizing and using the law in a strategic way to advance our key objectives, which are the 5 reforms, which we will keep referring to in our presentation. And research and solutions, here we're working together with our partners, and we provide tactical support through providing research. So we are looking at the status quo and how things are, researching all the relevant information within that, and then capacitating supporters of the campaign and the ECD sector as a whole in terms of moving the needle in law reform. And in terms of movement building, Real Reform for ECD believes in the power of collaborative action. This is rooted in the coalition of our steering committee, and it goes through to our network of ECD forums, our Real Reformers, and also in how we work with partner organizations. The 5 reforms of which Real Reform for ECD is based on are these. It is achieving a one-step registration process for when practitioners want to register their centers. They're not given the runaround, but there's a one-step process. The second reform is access to the per child per day subsidy to all children who need it. The third reform is simpler, adequate health, safety, and program standards. Fourth, support to meet registration requirements. And fifth, infrastructure support and development of ECD providers. How we wish to achieve this is through the following objectives that run through all of our campaigns. So it is firstly, evidence-informed reforms are adopted in the second Children's Amendment Bill and other relevant regulations and norms and standards. Through our local government work, this is trying to make local government work for ECD. Through advocating for adequate nutritional support at all early learning programs, and eventually a self-standing Early Childhood Development Act be put in place. We'll be now heading over to looking at Real Reform for ECD's campaigns for the year. So coming into this year, we had set out to create a steering committee or sustain a representative, active, and engaged Real Reform for ECD Alliance that consciously coordinates, advances, and supports the objectives of the Real Reform for ECD movement. We set out to contribute to an informed ECD sector with individuals and groups ready to become active in Real Reform for ECD campaigns. Ensure the movement is sector-led and is a movement of knowledgeable and empowered real reformers and democratic role players. Ensure the movement is rooted in evidence-informed disruptive knowledge, strategies, models, and proposals to make government work for early childhood development. I will then be going into a breakdown of what has been achieved in these objectives in the year. So in terms of the first one and our creating the active steering committee, our milestones have been a strengthened steering committee that is active and representative and coordinates campaigns, and a resourced and capacitated secretariat for the campaign. As Kayin had said in his presentation, we are a coalition. The steering committee is made up of a coalition of different organizations within the ECD sector, steering the work of Real Reform for ECD. And these are them represented on the screen. In September, the steering committee met for the first time, having worked together for about a year and a half before that, all of that work being virtual. So we were privileged and blessed to come together, and it is at this meeting we were able to put together our strategy going forward as Real Reform for ECD. Secondly, we have our objectives to create an informed ECD sector. Critical milestones this year is a wide-reaching information campaign on the reforms needed in early childhood development. This included making people aware of those 5 reforms and how the work can be done to advocate for those reforms. Secondly, regular informative workshops for the ECD sector. This speaks to the workshops that we've been having throughout the year with ECD forums across the country. And thirdly, strong partnerships and support from ECD forums and the ECD sector. So the work that we are doing and the outputs are not necessarily limited to the steering committee alone, but the steering committee as member representatives have their own networks of ECD forums and ECD organizations and role players in the sector, of whose power we also leverage and have been able to extend the reach and work of Real Reform for ECD. So how have we successfully sort of spread the word of Real Reform for ECD? We've been doing that through a few things, and those are highlighted here. Press releases. We've been hosting webinars throughout the year, 5 of them hosted, publishing op-eds on the campaigns that we are working on, and also leveraging the power of mainstream media through our media appearances, trying to conscientize people to the work of Real Reform for ECD and the work of the sector as a whole. And then also, we have had a total of 21 workshops in 2022, and these have been held in 4 provinces across 7 municipalities. We have built a strong network of 9 ECD forums. These are ECD forums we've been working with consistently. So we have been identifying them, and then we work with them more concentrated on how we can create or bridge the gap between ECD practitioners and local municipality within where those ECD practitioners are located. And that work has been through IDP processes, conscientizing practitioners to the importance of the IDP, importance of being a part of community participation meetings, ward committees, and all the tools that are available at local government level that practitioners can use in order to advocate for early childhood development. Through these practices, through our work, we have been able to reach over 600 practitioners. And currently, we are busy putting together an advocacy module or a curriculum of which we can share more broadly with early childhood development practitioners. And thirdly, the movement, it's been showing that the movement is sector-led by people who are knowledgeable. Real reformers are, the milestones that we have achieved in that regard is that real reformers are an active network advancing real reform for ECD campaigns. So through our work, we have seen real reformers be empowered to be doing some of the legal mobilization themselves. For instance, in terms of submissions, I will get into that detail in a few slides, but in terms of supporting practitioners in making submissions to the IDP or making submissions at a national level, empowering practitioners to know what that process is and how they can go about getting involved in that. Organized collective responses on issues identified, and activated steering committee networks. So in that regard, our network of ECD practitioners, the real reformers, are a network of active partners driving real reform for ECD's campaign on the ground. We have been able to support practitioners in making submissions to Kotze regulations earlier this year and the Bella Bill. And also specifically to the integrated development plans. So our success here, we were able to get 30 submissions for the Kotze regulations. These are all submissions we were actually just CC'd in. 9 submissions for Bella Bill. And upon review of the municipalities where we made IDP submissions, we have reviewed those IDPs, and 4 municipalities have meaningfully included ECD in their IDPs. This is continuing work as IDPs are reviewed on yearly. So Real Reform for ECD will be continuing the work of trying to get early childhood development represented meaningfully in development plans. And then lastly, the Real Reform movement is rooted in evidence-led knowledge, strategies, models, and proposals to try and make make government work for ECD. The milestone achieved this year is that research and proposals developed and technical support provided to create evidence-based for specific ECD reforms models, proposals, and if necessary, litigation, and collect ECD data and feedback and monitor the legislative landscape. We've been then involved with this technical support through the Second Children's Amendment Bill, Kotze regulations, and the Bella Bill. We have also put together research task teams to do research on the right to nutrition in South Africa, and have also been conducting research on the right to ECD in 4 different jurisdictions internationally, doing that in partnership with Oxford University. We have provided a comprehensive study on the regulatory framework for health, safety, and environmental standards for ECD. And a huge thank you to Ilifa Labantwana and the Equality Collective on that last point. So now, what has Real Reform been working on currently? We have 3 separate campaigns that Real Reform for ECD has been working on. It is Make the Bill Better campaign. It is the Make Local Government Work for ECD campaign, and the Right to Nutrition campaign. The Make the Bill Better campaign, it is working towards making the Second Children's Amendment Bill better and make it also meaningfully represent the needs of rural reform, the needs of the ECD sector. And our guest speaker, Janeli Kotze, will be speaking more on that second Children's Amendment Bill and the progress that's been done in the sector. And then secondly, we have make local government work for ECD. And the aim of this is local government to create safe and vibrant care and learning spaces for young children by prioritizing early childhood development in their plans and budgets. And then the right to nutrition research. The aim is to explore the possibility of nutritional support to all ECD programs, regardless of registration. In Make Local Government Work for ECD, critical milestones. Firstly, an informed-based ECD practitioner across four provinces, 7 municipalities. Importance of the IDP in developing and advocating for early childhood development and how they can work with local government to advance ECD agenda. Second, sustainable working relationships with local democratic role players. Those who work with democratic role players know the challenge that comes from creating these sustainable relationships. And we can report that we have had some success. However, a lot more work needs to be done in creating these relationships with democratic role players. And lastly, developing ECD policies at local government level. There's been an interest in some of our partner municipalities for reform to support in the development of ECD policies. And in terms of our footprint, as Kayin had said, we are quite broad-based in South Africa and growing slowly, trying to sustain some wins where we already have our footprint so that these wins are more easily duplicated in other municipalities as we go forward. And then some of the lessons that we have learned is that in the local government work that we have done, is that in terms of the legal framework, we need to be familiar with the legislature pertaining to early childhood development so that we can use that to advance, advance ECD. In terms of relationship, long-lasting relationships built on trust and commitment need to be made with municipal officials so that they can become champions for early childhood development in local government. In terms of education, municipal officials often do not know what their mandate is when it comes to early childhood development. They need to be educated by civil society and national and provincial government about what their responsibility is according to the law. And lastly, collaboration. Collaboration is the form, of multi-stakeholder forums and task teams is essential to making local government prioritize early childhood development. Another campaign is the right to nutrition research. Some of our gains in this research, we are still very much in the early stages of this research. And this research will then in 2023 be developed, will inform rather the Real Reform for ECD movement on a way forward. However, what has been achieved this year is that we have finalized research leads who will be leading specific parts of the research. We have finalized research questions and methodologies, and also the research task teams have been operationalized. So they're currently in the process of conducting that research. And then we have 4 streams of research. The first one, it is basic nutrition. So that research task team will be looking at what is basic nutrition. When we say that children have quality nutrition, what does that entail? Secondly is the economics task team, and they will be researching what is the return on investment in terms of the child's outcome, but also from an economic perspective, what is the return on investment in investing in early nutrition? And then we have right to nutrition task team. So different from the first task team, the right to nutrition task team will be looking at basic nutrition from a legal standpoint. So what does the law envision basic nutrition to look like? And then the last task team will be looking at implementation strategies. So this will be looking at in what ways can we actually get food or nutrition to the ECD centers themselves. And they will be exploring different ways that can be done. And that brings me to the end of my part. I ran a little bit of over time. I hope, Janeli, you can forgive me on that. However, Real Reform is really looking forward to 2023. And if you would like to support the campaign and get important information and be kept in the loop about the activities of the campaign, you can register at ecdreform.org.za, ecdreform.org.za. And on that website, you'll also get a bit more information on the work being done by the campaign. Thank you so much for the space you've held for me and for listening to what I've had to present. Sis Rina, back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Tshepo, for your presentation. It was quite a mouthful. It is very interesting to see how much has been achieved by our campaigns in such a short space of time. All three of them, actually, they have achieved quite a lot. I find it very interesting that, with our information campaigns and workshops, how they've reached a wide base of people in the ECD space, and focusing primarily on our ECD practitioners, as well as our government officials, councillors, and ward committees. And the whole decision of mobilizing people on the ground is that we are taking our people to our municipalities, especially in the areas of making our like prioritizing ECD in their IDPs, and guide people on the ground to actually interact with these officials and understand their mandate as well. Thank you very much, Tshepo, for touching all that and all our achievements in this past year. We will have that presentation ready. I have questions for you, but I think we don't have enough time to go through that. But we have some comments on the charts, and we see that our team is busy, Kayin, and the rest of the team is busy responding to all the comments that are put in our charts. Now it is 1:30. We only have 30 minutes left. It is, we'll be finishing at 2 o'clock. I'll take this time to introduce to you our guest speaker for the day. In my introduction earlier on, I've asked permission through myself that I will leave her bio until the end of our webinar, because she is our guest speaker. I'll take this time to introduce you to Dr. Janeli Kotze. She is currently an acting director for ECD at the Department of Basic Education. Janeli completed her PhD in economics at the University of Stellenbosch, focusing on understanding the complexities of the South African education crisis and on the improvement of national policy around this issue. She has been involved in a number of local and international research projects relating to the evaluation of national policy, cross-national comparisons of educational achievement, learning tragedies of children over time, and the interaction between low-quality schooling and poverty, and early childhood development. So today, Janeli will give us an update on the ECD function. Remember in my introduction that we've seen quite a lot of developments in the sector. ECD function shift was one of those. And she will also update us on the second amendment, second Children's Amendment Bill. We are going to give over to you, Janeli. I think I saw you joining the webinar earlier on. I'm not sure if you're still in the room.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Thank you.
Over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rina, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak to you today. Oh, sorry, I've got right presentation, wrong cover page. My apologies for that. Firstly, just to congratulate the Real Reform for ECD. As I was sitting and listening to the work you've done, you've really done amazing work this year, and it's partnerships like this that we are so grateful for as the Department of Basic Education. This ECD is such a massive function. It is a whole sector on its own, and as one department, we cannot definitely not deliver what we need to deliver. And it's partnerships like this with the Real Reform that we are so grateful for, to see the work that you're doing and driving and helping us to see how can we best serve the children for South Africa. Because I think in the end, we share the same goals. We want to see children striving, and we want to see how can we collaborate to make that work. So today I'm going to give you just a sense of the what we've been doing, what the function shift has entailed, focusing on some of the things that's been happening, but then also specifically looking at the Second Amendment Bill and giving you an update on that. And I think the first question that was asked that I look at is just what was the rationale for the function shift? Why did this function shift happen? And some background is that this function shift has actually been in policies and it's been coming for a long time. So already back in 2011, 2012, the National Development Plan said that there should be this policy and program shift to ensure that the DBE takes core responsibility of the provisioning and monitoring of ECD. The ANC has also been calling for it over a couple of their national conferences, but in the 54th conference, they said again very clearly that the ANC must ensure that there's a systematic relocation of this responsibility. The ECD policy that came out in 2015, 2016 also said that there should be this policy and programs shift to ensure that DB takes full responsibility. So it's been coming for a long time, but then it finally got its political impetus in 2019 when the president in the State of the Nation address said that it will now shift. And that gave us the backing that we needed to make sure that this function shift happened. So for 2019, 2020, 2021, we spend a lot of time on preparing ourselves as basic education to be able to take this function. Then in 2021, we had this very intensive negotiations and integrated work with social development and identifying what needs to be shifted. And then, as you know, this year, at the start of the financial year, 1st of April, the function shifted to basic education. And just what we as basic education hope to bring and the value that we're hoping to add to the sector is to increase the quality of EPD provisioning. We know that there's been historically, for a very long time, there's been quite a strong focus on childcare, but we really want to have a more holistic focus on nurturing care, early stimulation, early learning. There's already a couple of frameworks and documents in place. We've got the National Curriculum Framework. We've got the CAP that focuses on grade R. We've got the National Early Learning Development Standards. And we want to have a bit of a stronger focus on how do we make sure this is happening in ECD programs so that children are adequately prepared when they reach school and they can thrive later in schooling. So one of the things that I was asked to do is to be quite honest on some of the challenges that we've been facing in terms of the function shift. There's obviously been many. A function like this doesn't just shift easily. It is a highly complex function shift, and this was acknowledged by National Treasury and DPSA as well, as to say this is probably the most complex function shift we've had in the history of South Africa. So inevitably, there's many challenges that will arise. The first one is on human resources. There were 683 officials that were transferred from DSD to DBE. But we realized that this isn't enough. We realized that this function shift has meant that at a district and provincial level, there's still a need to appoint more social workers and so that they can support and monitor ECD programs. So this is something we are currently working with provinces on, is how can we fill these gaps? How can we see the extent to which more posts are needed? We'll also be doing a research study in the new year with the World Bank to do a capacity and needs analysis at a district and provincial level to determine what is the scope of work still needed. Office accommodation is a bit of an issue. Most officials have accommodation now at the DB offices at the different levels. But in some of the provinces and districts, we've had to enter into MOUs with DSD so that we can still make use of their offices until we've got enough office space. Tools of trade is the issue. The principle was that all officials need to move over with their tools of trade, but we realized in practice this didn't always happen. And often at a district and provincial level, social workers do not have the laptops or cars that they need to fulfill their functions. So we're working on a resource gap analysis to see how can we address any of the resource gaps that may arise. In terms of the payment of subsidies, we know that hasn't gone as smooth as we really tried and hoped that will happen. And often this also had to do with almost just bad timing, where often service level agreements with ECD programs coincided, or the conclusion of service level agreements coincided with this function shift, and DBE had to go through the whole process of first signing new service level agreements with ECD programs before we can do the payment of subsidies. So this obviously, as I say, had an effect on the payment of subsidies. Another issue that arose is a requirement that was many provinces, and actually we're now realizing provincial treasuries has put on basic education, is for ECD programs to register on the central supplier database. And we're working closely with National Treasury and our provinces currently to make sure that this confusion is sorted out. We're continuing with registering new ECDs. We are trying to fast track the registration process as much as possible. And then finally, we realized that there were many misconceptions on the ground due to weak communication channels in the sector. And the DBE, led by our Minister and Deputy Minister, are trying to conduct roadshows to help clarify these conceptions. And we're trying to, in each and every possible forum that we can, to clarify these misconceptions and to get buy-in from the sector. So what have we been doing as DBE to stabilize the function under us and to make sure that DBE officials are aware of the challenges that's being faced by ECD programs? We've been having multiple workshops that we are running from our national office with provinces and districts to make sure that they're aware of how the processes work. And the two big processes that we've been focusing on is to say we need to ensure that as DBE, we can do the payment of subsidies and we can do registration. There's a lot of other challenges, but we have to be strategic, and we identified these two as the most strategic and most urgent processes for all basic education staff at a provincial and district level to understand. So with our partners, we've been doing workshops with provinces on the ECD subsidy guidelines so they understand how the guidelines work. We've been doing a lot of workshops on the Bangasali registration process to help provinces and districts understand how registration works. And then we've also had a workshop with provinces on the Second Amendment Bill to make them aware of what is happening and what's being proposed there. A second panel of communication that we've been having is to add all the different structures that we can to start having ECD as a main and a standing item so that we can at all levels influence policymakers and decision makers, politicians to understand the context of ECD. So, for instance, ECD is a standing item in our Heads of Education Committee meeting. That's where all the HODs of provinces meet, as well as CEM, that's the Council of Education Ministers meeting. That's where all the MECs for education meet. ECD is a standing item there where we, in each and every single meeting, update them on what's happening in the sector, what's the progress that we're making, what are the challenges that we're facing, so that they are capacitated on understanding the sector. Then we also have interprovincial meetings regularly where we meet with our provincial ECD staff. In these meetings, we also make sure that they're aware of the challenges. but similarly, that they make us aware of the challenges on the ground. There's a conditional grant forum, there's intersectoral forum, all of these structures we're using to see how can we have our provincial staff, our district staff, our national staff on top of the ECD sector and the issues that we're facing. And then within provinces, there's many capacity building sessions. All the provinces have had information sharing sessions just before the function shift, and with the function shift, I know that many provinces are ensuring that that the social workers that came over do capacity building sessions with the education counterparts, so that everyone is aware of the business processes and the challenges faced by the sector. And I've seen many of our provincial colleagues making a concerted effort to go out to ECD programs to understand the context, understand the challenges. So there's many levels of in government of education officials that needed to be onboarded with ECD and understand ECD. So we've been trying to address all these different levels using the different forums and platforms that we can. In terms of strengthening the sector, the big focus for us as basic education is to say that we need to create an enabling environment so that ECD programs can flourish. And the reason why we want to do that is so that children can receive quality early childhood development services that will enable them to thrive. So the big focus for us this year, next year, is that how do we create this enabling environment? How do we ensure that the systems and structures are in place for ECD programs to flourish with the intention that this in the end will benefit children? So there's many areas of improvement that we're working on. I'll do a quick highlight. I'm aware of time, so I won't go into too much detail. But as was mentioned previously, you're aware of the second Children's Amendment Bill that's happening. Along with that, we are reviewing the regulations as well as the norms and standards. And the whole idea of this revising of the regulatory framework is to see how can we remove unnecessary barriers to registration and how can we support the sector better. We're also developing a management information system for ECD, and the whole idea of this is to say how can we have a structure of, how can we have a system in place so that we've got updated data on ECD, we know where ECD programs are, we know how many there are, we can contact them, and all of this will again help us support the sector better so that we can get information out to the sector, so we can contact the sector, so we can get resources out to the sector. It's unfortunately only if we know about ECD programs and how to contact them can we support them best. So this system is quite critical for that. We are thinking, or we're working on improving the administration of the ECD subsidy by reviewing the guidelines and training provinces on the guidelines. We want to improve the funding to the sector, and we're working with National Treasury and the World Bank on seeing how can we start systematically improve funding to the sector. We are trying to improve the implementation of systems for infrastructure using the ECD conditional grant, and there's work that we are doing to design appropriate systems for providing infrastructure support to ECD. We're working with some partners on the development of a quality assurance system, and the intention here is to say how can we have very clear quality standards to articulate what we do expect of ECD programs, but then also how do we put the supports in place to allow ECD programs to meet these quality standards. Appropriate skilling strategy for ECD practitioners is one of our key projects for next year. It's the development of a human resource development plan. Developing systems to support the new startup phase for ECD programs is really important. And then also thinking through payment systems for early learning programs and what's the most effective way of reaching early learning programs with funding support. So strengthening the sector, so as the projects I've mentioned now are specifically projects that's driven by national department to see how can we create that enabling environment. But that is only approaching the problem from one aspect. We realize that many partners are needed so that we can fully support ECD. So as you know, the vision that we have for ECD is we want to firstly increase access so that all children in South Africa can access early childhood development programs. But then in the same vein, we want to improve the quality of early childhood development services. So if we really want to achieve this vision, we need all hands on deck. We definitely need to partner with the sector. And I think what we really need assistance and support with the sector is see how can we increase access by locally advocating for the importance of ECD. On the ground, we really need the support from the sector to really help parents understand this importance of ECD, so that we can make sure that they're aware of the fact that their children need to attend ECD programs. Similarly, we need to increase the quality by enabling ECD practitioners to obtain NQF level 4 and 5 qualifications. And this is definitely activities that the sector can partner with us on to see how can we really achieve this vision of increasing access and improving quality. Then just to double click on the Second Amendment Bill and what's happening there, I think the first question that we were asked is just why were the sections on ECD rejected in the original bill? Unfortunately, just to be clear here, this was before the bill came over to basic education. So this happened under social development side. And the reasons that they were given to us for this rejection is that it's threefold. The first one is that the Department of Social Development was under quite a lot of pressure to process the foster care sessions of the bill. And they were worried that the ECD sections may delay the progress of the bill. So that was one of the reasons. The second reason is that SALGA objected to the inclusion of some of the clauses and stated that they were not sufficiently consulted. So we had there was concern that the consultation process needs to happen again. And then there was some uncertainty on just what the effect of the function shift will have on the processing of the ECD clauses. This is the first time in the history of our democracy that there was a bill that was also coinciding with a function shift. So there wasn't much clarity on who should be responsible for this bill, given that this function will be moving over to basic education. So these were the three reasons, at least given to us, on why the Portfolio Committee decided, or Portfolio Committee for Social Development decided that the ECD section should rather form a second bill than be part of the original bill. So what has been the process that we've undertaken to improve the sections on the bill? The moment we realized that these sections were rejected as basic education, we established an interdepartmental technical task team to say, how can we strengthen the bill? At that stage, we were fortunate that all the submissions have been made to the Portfolio Committee. So we had a full understanding of what the sector thought of these sections in the bill, and we can really take them on board. So we established a task team. It had representation from basic education, social development, Kotze, SALGA, the Intersectoral Forum, and then various legal experts. All the input that we received through the public hearing process, we analyzed, we evaluated them, and then we addressed them in the Second Amendment Bill. And this brought us to a bill that I think is much stronger than it was before these sections were removed. And I do believe that the fact that the ECD sections were removed from the bill really allowed us to properly interrogate and properly consult with, for instance, SALGA and Kotze, and see how can we strengthen this bill to best serve the sector. So where we are now is that we are embarking on a process to align the regulations as well as the norms and standards with the Second Amendment Bill. And this again will further enhance the streamlining of the registration process. So we're really trying to dig into all of the details, see what can we do to ensure that the regulatory framework is developmental in nature and really supports the sector. So what have been the challenges in passing the Second Children's Amendment Bill? I think obviously we're aware that it was removed from the original bill, and that meant that we had to do quite a lot of work in terms of reviewing the bill and making sure that it's strengthened. But there's many processes that needs to happen internally before a bill can be processed or can be passed. And the first that we needed to do is to do a socio-economic impact assessment. We've completed that. We also needed to develop a memorandum of objects that we've completed. We're now in the process where we need to get the bill certified by the Office of the Chief State Law Advisor. And that is turning out to be quite a complex process. There's been a lot of back and forth with the OXLA to see whether we can clarify some of the concerns they have with the bill. So this is still an ongoing process, which we really hope we can conclude soon. And then once we've got a certified bill, we will take it to the Portfolio Committee for Basic Education for them to process the bill. And this still needs to happen once we've got the certification from the Office of the Chief State Law Advisor. So what changes will the bill bring to the sector? Hopefully a lot of positive ones. The first one is just clarifying the roles and responsibilities between different departments, but I think more importantly, different spheres of government. We're really trying to clarify the role of municipalities, and Kotze and Salga has been instrumental in providing us with input on how can we do this best. We are integrating ECD into one chapter so that it won't be fall under partial care and ECD programs anymore. It will only be fall in ECD programs, which will already streamline the registration process by it only requiring one registration. We won't have the two registration processes anymore. We're striving for equity in service delivery. We are recognizing in the bill that there are different modalities for ECD programs, and the norms and standards will be sensitive to the different modalities for ECD programs. We are trying in every way possible to streamline and simplify the registration process. We're really trying to alleviate the bureaucratic burden on ECD programs while ensuring that they remain safe and conducive for early learning. And then we want to ensure that government funding in ECD can flow in such a way to enable access and quality for all children. Colleagues, I hope that has given you a good overview of where we are and what's been happening. And I think there's 5 minutes left for some questions if anyone has questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janeli. You've managed your time very well. We will have a round of questions, just maybe 3 or so. But, oh, we already have Hopo on raising a hand already. You've touched on quite a lot of what we're expecting you to present on the rationale for the function shift and where we are. And I like the fact that it makes my heart happy or jump to hear you saying that ECD is being prioritized in the Department of Basic Education, and it has a standing item on very, very important platforms like in your headcoms, in your interprovincial meetings, in your conditional grant forums, and all those important forums. And also that you going around provinces doing some capacity buildings and make sure that the provinces understand the business processes as far as the function shift is concerned. Hoplang, I'll give you a minute to ask your question.
Thanks so much. Sure. Thanks so much, Rina. And thank you, Janeli, for a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to find out from you, there's a call for comments that have come out from the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure 2050 in relation to various types of infrastructure needed for the right to socioeconomic rights, and education is included under that umbrella. And thankfully, ECD is also part of the basket of goods that's recognized in that submission, or in that proposal from the DPWI. I'm just wondering, is the department planning to work with the Department of Public Works in terms of thinking through what ECD infrastructure could potentially look like? What thoughts have you had within the department around it, particularly for non-center-based practitioners or programs? You know, like how do we support home and community-based facilities through this plan? And yeah, I just wanted to see if there's alignment there, and if the departments had any thoughts on that. My other question was for, I'm sorry, Rina, my other question was for Kayin, and also potentially for Janeli, around the Thrive by 5 findings around maths and numeracy. and how the figures were, they didn't look good, and recognizing that not everything looked particularly great, but maths and numeracy weren't great. And I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are in relation to children of that particular age group, you know, like below 5, learning skills such as maths, numeracy, and language. You know, when I think there's an understanding or a recognition of play-based learning. Is it possible, you know? Is it the right barometer? Are we looking at the right facets? Thanks, Rina.
Yeah. Thank you, Hapo. We'll take 2 more questions, and then Janeli and Kayin will respond to those questions. We're running out of time. I'm trying to unmute you, Matwe. Ruby. Oh, that's our Ruby. You can go ahead, Sis Rose. Ruby, I'm not sure if you, I see your hand is up. I'm not sure if you have a question or you're struggling to talk. But while we're still waiting for Ruby to come through, Janeli, can you try and respond to Hapo's questions?
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. To be very honest, I am not 100% sure of exactly what's happening in infrastructure at this point. In the DBE, we've got someone dedicated to the infrastructure for ECD specifically, and that we're having a workshop early next year with them to fully understand what their plans on, what they are thinking. So I don't want to speak out of turn at this point, Opulang, but I think I will definitely make them aware of the work happening in the Department of Public Works. I wasn't aware of that. And see how we can work best with them. I know some of the things we're already thinking through, and I've started conversations with our infrastructure colleagues on, is to see how can we work in terms of the investment in private infrastructure. That's probably the biggest headache that we're facing in the sector, and we're already investigating ways of doing that there. I think the second question, I hope I understood it correctly, is whether the Thrive by 5 measured to the correct outcomes, child outcomes, and that's definitely, we obviously think so, and we feel that the aspects measured by Thrive by 5 really provides us with the understanding where the children will be developmentally or are developmentally on track and ready for schooling. In that sense. So we're really hoping to use that information to say, how can we strengthen the practices of our ECD practitioners? How do we make them aware of these different skills that children need, especially the softer skills, so that they, and what activities can practitioners do to stimulate this in children? So the Thrive by 5 index has been super instrumental in the way we do things. I hope I've answered your questions, Hopelang.
You have, thank you. And not casting any doubt in terms of the data from Thrive by 5. It was more along the conversation of numeracy and maths for young children, and whether that's a helpful assessment for children of that age. I think that's what I was trying to get at. And if, you know, curriculum or practice is more around play-based learning. I'm sorry, it's coming out very fuzzy, but that's more what I meant than any doubt on the data.
Thank you, Hopelang. I think Sis Rina is currently experiencing some connectivity issues. Yes, she's being load shedded right now, and she's trying to hotspot through her phone. But Sis Rina, if you'll allow me, I will close off the event, and just on the interest of time, just being respectful of the time. However, Real Reform for ECD welcomes any further questions, any further engagements from anyone who is present today. You can email your questions. Either they can be for Real Reform for ECD or for the Department of Basic Education if you still have something heavy on your chest that you'd like to speak to the Department of Basic Education about. And then we will get those questions to Janeli and get you the answers that you are looking for. But thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for all the support people in the ECD sector have given Real Reform for ECD. We have had our gains, but a lot of work is still yet to be done. And it's very heartwarming and encouraging to see so many people in the sector. Speaking just personally, my work directly has been with practitioners, and just also seeing the eagerness and keenness of practitioners to be involved. I see Sis Rina has been able to get connectivity. Sis Rina had actually just taken over your gig and was closing off the event, but you can just close this off efficiently.
Thanks, Tshepo. We're facing the... I would like to express our gratitude for their presence and your contributions to make sure that this webinar was a great success, as it was. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Real Reform for ECD, I would really like to extend our thanks to Kayin, and thank you for your time once again and sharing all those insights and the reflections. We've definitely learned a lot. We are closing the year better equipped, and we're looking forward to start also like highlighting the areas of collaboration. So we'll start with those, how we're strengthening the sector, creating an enabling environment, revising the regulatory framework for learning programs to remove all the unnecessary barriers to registration. That has been our work and our advocacy as a Real Reform for ECD. Thank you very much for your time. Keep on supporting us and following us on our social media platforms, as well as our website, www.ecdreform.org.za. Thank you very much all for your time. Ngiyabule.